wrote the first 5 books of the Bible? The mystery of the Torah. Hey, quick question. Who do you think wrote the first 5 books of the Bible? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the big 5. If you said Moses, you're in good company, but also maybe not entirely right. Because here's the thing, the story of who actually wrote them, it's way more complicated than most Sunday school lessons. It's got mystery, contradictions, multiple anonymous authors, and yeah, maybe Moses didn't even write a single sentence. This is the kind of rabbit hole where you go in thinking you'll just learn a fun fact and come out rethinking everything you thought you knew about the Bible. Let's start with the classic view. Moses wrote all 5 books. That's been the traditional teaching in both Judaism and Christianity for centuries. Why? Because the books constantly talk about Moses, especially in Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. One verse even says, Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. So it makes sense that people assumed he was the author. Plus, Moses was the guy. He freed the Israelites from Egypt, had direct chats with God, and came down from Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments like a spiritual action hero. But then, there's a bit of a problem. At the end of Deuteronomy, Moses dies. And the story doesn't just say, and he died. It gives a whole post-death reflection, including the fact that no one knows where he's buried to this day. So unless Moses wrote his own obituary from beyond the grave, we've got some explaining to do.
Have you ever wondered why Satan so desperately wanted the body of Moses after his death? This question might seem unsettling or even bizarre, yet it's deeply rooted in biblical accounts. Moses, a towering figure in history, led the Israelites from the shackles of Egyptian slavery to the doorstep of the Promised Land. He was the conduit for the 10 Commandments, a beacon of hope and faith. But what transpired after his demise was shocking. According to the Bible, God laid Moses to rest in an undisclosed location. Yet a peculiar event unfolded. There was a fierce altercation between Angel Michael and the devil over Moses' remains. This isn't a tale spun from thin air, but a reference from the book of Jude, verse 9, where the Archangel Michael and Satan lock horns seriously over the body of Moses. This scenario raises more questions than it answers.
And that's just the beginning. Scholars eventually started noticing things that didn't quite line up, like the creation stories in Genesis. In chapter 1, animals are made first, then humans. In chapter 2, man comes first, then the animals. Same Bible, 2 different sequences. Then there's the matter of God's name. Sometimes he's called Elohim, other times Yahweh. Occasionally, both, in the same sentence. And the writing styles? All over the place. Some parts feel like campfire stories with emotion and drama. Others read like a divine legal code with step-by-step priestly procedures. It started looking less like one author and more like a group project. You know, the kind where everyone writes their own part in completely different tones, and someone tries to stitch it all together the night before it's due.
If you pick up your Bible and start at the very beginning, you can read the Genesis creation account in chapter 1. But in chapter 2, we find what appears to be another creation account. Man is created before plants and animals, but woman is not created until the very end, whereas in Genesis 1, plants come first, then animals, and then both male and female are created together in the image of God. Because of this, many source-critical scholars suggest there were 2 distinct creation accounts that were part of different ancient Israelite sources. Allegedly, a redactor combined 4 different sources from Israel's past into the present form of the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses. When this happened, the 2 creation accounts were put side by side in the Pentateuch, even though they contradict. This hypothesis is not without its critics. There is a lot of evidence that suggests Genesis 1 and 2 were meant to function as a unified narrative.
Enter the documentary hypothesis. Meet J, E, P, and D. So here's where modern biblical scholars come in with what's called the documentary hypothesis. Basically, the Torah was written by at least 4 major sources, each with their own style, perspective, and time period, and later edited into one big scroll. Here's the lineup. J. Yahwist calls God Yahweh, describes God walking around, feeling emotions, being very human-like, likely written in Judah around 950 BCE. E. Elohist refers to God as Elohim. God is more distant, speaks through dreams, angels, and signs. Probably came from northern Israel around 850 BCE. D. Deuteronomist, the law and order writer, focuses on obedience, morality, and covenant with God, especially prominent in Deuteronomy. Likely appeared during King Josiah's reign. around 620 BCE. P. Priestly. Love structure. Obsessed with rituals, dates, genealogy, and laws. This source likely came during or after the Babylonian exile, around 500 BCE. So these weren't just writers, they were communities with different worldviews, shaping how they told their version of the story. And what's wild, instead of choosing one version over another, ancient editors decided, why not include them all? Hence, we get multiple takes on the same events, sometimes back to back.
You may have heard that there are many scholars today who believe there is a secret within the 5 books of Moses. It was not originally a unified document, but was originally 4 separate sources that a redactor later combined into one. These original 4 sources had differences and contradictory stories, like different flood accounts, or 2 separate creation accounts. The redactor combined them, attempting to make a unified document. This is called the documentary hypothesis, and it is a well-respected theory in the scholarship surrounding the Pentateuch, and has a lot of scholarly proponents. There are also a lot of scholars that have challenged the documentary hypothesis and have argued the 5 books of Moses have a lot more unity than we realize.
Let's check out some moments where these overlapping sources become pretty obvious. The flood story, Genesis. One part says Noah took 2 of every animal. Another says 7 pairs of clean animals and 2 unclean. One version says the flood lasted 40 days. Another says 150 days. These aren't sloppy errors. They're different traditions that got merged together, and no one edited out the contradictions. Creation stories. Genesis 1 verses 2. Genesis 1. Structured, poetic. God creates everything by speaking. Day by day order. Genesis 2. More earthy. Man is made from dust, then animals, then woman. God is hands-on. 2 very different vibes, and yet both are considered sacred. Why? Because both matter deeply to the communities that passed them down.
All right, so we are back in the book of Genesis, and this time we're going to go to the very beginning of the book, specifically to chapters 1, 2, and 3. Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting and also a bit unusual about these chapters is that there's the creation account in Genesis 1, and the beginning of Genesis 2, that moves through the 7 days of creation. And then, beginning in verse 4 of chapter 2, there's another account, which again talks about the creation of trees and animals and man and woman. So right next to each other, we have 2 different accounts about the same event, which raises the question, why? What's the purpose of talking about the same topic again?
So, what about Moses? Was Moses just a legend? Not necessarily. He may very well have been a real person, a prophet, a leader, a revolutionary figure whose impact shaped the identity of Israel. But did he personally write the first 5 books of the Bible, word for word? Probably not. It's more likely that Moses' story was the foundation, and over the centuries, storytellers, priests, and scribes passed down those traditions. Eventually, they were written down and woven together into the Torah. Writing in ancient Hebrew didn't even become standardized until long after Moses' time. And widespread literacy? That was mostly for kings and scribes, not shepherds turned prophets. So yeah, Moses may have kicked off the story, but a whole crew finished the job. You might be wondering, why does any of this matter? Because it changes how we read the Bible. Instead of thinking of it as one seamless book dropped from the sky, we see it as something human, layered, collaborative, shaped by history, culture, and real people trying to make sense of their world and their faith. And somehow, that makes it even more powerful. It shows that faith evolves, that even ancient communities wrestled with big questions. Who are we? Why are we here? What does God want from us? And in some strange, beautiful way, we're still asking the same questions today.
Why did God create us? God is a creative being, and it gives him pleasure to create. God is a personal being, and it gives him pleasure to have other beings he can have a genuine relationship with. The creation of man was the climax of the creation process. You could say, the best was saved for last. Genesis chapter 1 verses 27 to 29. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them.
So, who really wrote the first 5 books of the Bible? Short answer, not just Moses. Long answer, a beautiful, messy patchwork stitched together by prophets, poets, priests, and people just trying to understand the divine. So next time someone says Moses wrote the Bible, You can smile and say, well, it's complicated. Thanks for watching. If your brain's spinning a little, same here. Drop a comment. Are you Team Moses or Team JEDP? Let's debate nicely. And if you like diving into big questions like this, hit that like, subscribe, and share button. Catch you in the next one, and stay curious.